Hi, today I'm going to brew 5 litres of a Beavertown Neck Oil clone. It's very probable you'll already be really familiar with Neck Oil because it's the second best selling craft beer in the UK as of today, i.e. July 22. That's behind Camden Hills and ahead of Brewdog's Punk IPA, so it's a big seller and really popular. It's also really nice, and I really want to brew a clone and have wanted to for a while. It's described as a session pale, so that's 4.3%, very chuggable. So it's light to medium bodied, refreshing and crisp. But despite that, has many of the sort of fruity hop aromas that we expect from pale ales that are absolutely on trend at the moment. So without further ado, let's get brewing. So if you want proof that you can make beer anytime with almost no equipment, try having your kitchen refurbed. Fortunately, leaving the stove as they have, I can still make beer here. So I'll show you the recipe card here and we'll unbox the ingredients sent from themaltmiller.co.uk. First out of the box is the selection of hops. Now you can see from the recipe card that it's a really complex hop bill here. And you can see there's lots of vacuum packed hop packets pre-weighed to the recipe amounts. Well, the next out of the bag is US 05. This is Safale's American Ale yeast in dried form. And finally, we have the grain bill, which is the pre-crushed extra pale malt and the Carapils for head retention. Well, next we prepare the water. We pour 2.3 litres of water into the mash pan, which is the pan nearest the camera, and then we put 3.5 litres of water into the Sparge pan at the back. More on that later. That's a total water of 5.8 litres, which is why you need a 5 litre bottle and a 2 litre bottle. By the way, keep the 5 litre bottle, we'll be fermenting in that later. Once all the water's poured in, you can turn the cooker on to heat the water up. We'll need to heat it up higher than the mash temperature of 65 degrees because the grain will cool the water down. So we'll heat it to 74 degrees. This is called the strike temperature. And I'll pop my thermometer in to monitor the temperature as it rises. Once the temperature's reached 74, I put my grain bag inside the saucepan. And I pour the pre-crushed grain into the bag, stirring slowly. Now the purpose here is to make sure every grain is surrounded by water, because you want all of the enzymes inside the grain to access the starch and convert it to sugar. Slowly pouring and continually stirring, that's the trick. Once it's all in, like a big bowl of oatmeal, you can put the lid on and start the mash timer for 60 minutes. Every 15 minutes or so, you can take the lid off, as I'm doing here, and give it a good stir while monitoring the temperature. If the temperature drops a bit, you can always give it a quick blast with a cooker. You can just see me dipping a pH strip in here to monitor the pH. When the 60-minute mash timer is up, lift out the grain bag and rest it on a colander or sieve as I am here so the water can run through. We're now about to start the Sparge process. This is where we pour hot water through the grain to rinse out the remaining sugar in the grain. You heat the Sparge pan to 77 degrees Celsius and then pour it through on top gently as if you're making a filter coffee. We're trying to achieve 3 things here. The first is to bring the water level up to the pre-boil volume. The second is to rinse out the remaining sugars held in the grain, and the third is as a consequence of the second, which is your brew house efficiency increases. That is, your ability to release all of the potential sugar held in the grain. Keep doing that until all the 3.5 litres of sparge water have been rinsed through the grains. Once the sparging is complete, I don a pair of sexy heat-proof gloves and I squeeze the last water out of the bag. Despite any controversy you might read about squeezing the grain bag, it's actually not at all harmful and gets the last goodness out of the grains. Give it one last desperate squeeze and then lift the colander and the bag out of the way. This is a 6-litre pan full to the brim. I'm just going to take a quick sample so I can measure the specific gravity before boil. Then I can put the lid on, start the cooker to heat it up and start the boil timer for 60 minutes also. While the water's heating up, I can weigh out my hops into separate pots for each of the different hop addition timings. When the water's coming to the boil, you'll notice a thin layer of protein on top. That's nothing to worry about. It's called hop break, and at the point of boiling it parts to leave a hole in the top. Now's the time to start the boil timer for 60 minutes. 30 minutes into the boil, it's time to add the first hop addition, 2.3 grams of Centennial. Once that's in, I give it a stir to mix it in thoroughly. 15 minutes from time, I'll add my copper wort chiller to the boiling wort to sanitize it. I also add a whirl flock tablet 15 minutes from the end to aid with the beer clarity. 10 minutes from the end and 5 minutes from the end, I add my final hop additions. Once the 60-minute boil is up, I transfer the pot to the sink, connect up the hoses to the chiller and start the cold water. This cold water runs through the copper coils, cooling the wort as quickly as possible. And you can see the temperature here visually dropping. 76, 75 and so on until it cools to room temperature. The weather was very hot at the time, so the nearest I could get it down to was 26, which is good enough for me. So I'll stop chilling now, put some sanitizer inside the empty 5-litre mineral water bottle, set up the sanitized funnel and sieve on top of the fermenter vessel, measure the post-boil volume using a chopstick as a customized depth gauge. I take a sample of wort here for the post-boil specific gravity, and this is useful to help determine the final alcohol content in the fermented beer. Now it's time to transfer the chilled wort to the fermenting vessel through the funnel and sieve, which will catch all of that vegetal hop matter that I chucked in during the boil. Rather than you watch me do this slowly and painstakingly, I'll speed it up for you now. While all the remaining wort is dripping through the hops, I'll put a lid on top to stop anything nasty dropping in, remembering of course that after the boil, everything that comes into contact with the wort must be sanitized. The risk of infection is high at this point. I'll then put the lid back on and vigorously shake the fermenter for a couple of minutes. Now, beer does not respond well to oxygen after fermentation, but before fermentation, the presence of oxygen in the wort really helps the yeast to reproduce to ensure that the colony size is large enough to ferment all of the wort. Once it's shaken up, it's time to pitch the yeast. Using sanitised scissors, I open the sanitised yeast packet and eyeball half the contents into the fermenting vessel. I then put the sanitised balloon over the top of the fermenting vessel with a pinprick in it, and we're ready to start the 14-day fermentation period. Put into a dark place at room temperature, even the next day you can see the white foaming kreuzen on top, and looking closer you can see lots of moving particles, which is yeast activity within. And when we step back from the fermenting vessel and have a look at the whole bottle, you can see that the balloon is inflated, proof that CO2 is being generated. All good signs. Hi, so I'm here to taste the neck oil. It fermented for 3 weeks. It should have been 2, but I went on holiday and didn't come back, so I couldn't put it into the keg until then. And then an additional something like a week in keg under 15 psi. So should have washed the glass better, but you've got a slightly hazy, pale yellow, decent carbonation on top. That's a lovely smell of citrusy, lemon, bit of grapefruit, and a little bit of tropical, which you do get in the real neck oil as well. Sort of mango, just very fruity, with obvious tropical notes. There's a bit of floral hops in there as well. Quite a low malt smell. It's not a strong malt smell coming through. Okay, it's not clear, but it's hazy, as dry hopped beers very often are slightly. Right, let's try it. So the head's stuck around for a minute, which is a good sign. Again, what you'd expect from a session IPA. It's not got a rich mouthfeel. It's kind of light, refreshing, light to medium mouthfeel. You've got a bit of the zip from the carbon dioxide as well, which balances nicely with the hops. So you've got this kind of bitterness, and yeah, that the hops really sort of jump out on the nose and in the mouth because of that zestiness, because of that carbonation as well. You get a little bit more of slight bready notes on the malt in the mouth, and then at the finish, then you get this kind of bitter, zesty, almost a lemon zesty type thing coming through. Which is pretty close to the original. I think the hops are spot on. Colour's definitely in the zone. It's pale. If anything, I think the real neck oil is actually slightly hazier. Carbonation spot on. You wouldn't want it more carbonated than this. My one ended up at 4.4, I think. So is a point higher than neck oil itself, but I wouldn't know. Delicious. Okay, well, you've seen how easy it is to brew. Do it at home. Get yourself some mineral water. Order the grain bill from somewhere online that will measure it out by the gram and crush it for you. Get a fine crush. get yourself a bag. So go do. It works out at £1.15 a pint. Yeah, it's half the price and it's fun. You made it yourself. And it'd be hard to tell apart. I mean, I think maybe if you put them next to each other, you might be able to tell them apart, but the whole point is you don't have to go buy it because you can make it yourself. Okay, well, till next time, looking forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Till then, happy brewing and cheers.